Gambling in ancient Rome, an empire's hidden obsession. Picture a tavern in Rome on any ordinary evening. In a dim corner, a handful of men are gathered around a small table. In their hands, small dice carved from bone. The dice are thrown, laughter mixes with groans of disappointment, and on the table sit coins, sometimes jewelry, sometimes even the cloak a man happens to be wearing that night, all staked on the next roll. This scene might feel strangely familiar to us today, but it actually describes a genuine obsession that gripped every corner of the Roman Empire, across every social class, 2,000 years ago. The Romans were a society that officially outlawed gambling, and yet that ban stopped almost no one. Under Roman law, gambling, and dice games in particular, was considered illegal. Lawmakers worried that gambling would disrupt public order, push people into debt, and lead to violence. But there was one strange exception. During the winter festival known as Saturnalia, gambling was temporarily permitted. An activity banned the rest of the year suddenly became open to everyone for a few days. But the truth is, the ban didn't do much on the other days of the year either. Archaeological evidence found across various parts of Rome, particularly in taverns and military camps, shows that gambling was, in practice, an ordinary part of daily life. One of the most common games was played with dice, known as tesserae. These dice were made from bone or ivory, and their shape was strikingly similar to the dice we use today. People used them for simple bets, sometimes as pure games of chance, and sometimes as part of more complex board games. Another popular game was called tabula, considered a very early ancestor of what we know today as backgammon. Two players moved pieces across a marked board by rolling dice. This game was so widespread that stone tables found across different regions of Rome still bear its traces. In some public squares, you can even find game boards etched directly into the stone paving, worn smooth by generations of players. There was also a game called duodecim scripta, meaning 12 lines, which is thought to be an earlier and more complex version of tabula, using a longer board and a somewhat different set of rules. Fragments of these boards, scratched into marble steps, temple floors, and even the stone benches of public baths, have been found across the empire, silent evidence of just how much idle time was spent chasing a lucky roll. Then there was par impar, a much simpler game that required no board or equipment at all. One player would hold a number of small objects, nuts, pebbles, coins, in a closed fist, and the other would guess whether the number was odd or even. Its simplicity likely explains why it turns up so often in ancient writing, mentioned almost casually, the way we might mention flipping a coin today. It was a pastime for idle moments. Children played it, soldiers played it, and it seems even senators weren't above passing the time with it while waiting for more important matters to begin. So who was playing all of this? The answer is, almost everyone. Traces of gambling turn up in every layer of Roman society. Among soldiers, gambling was practically a tradition. In distant frontier forts, during long stretches of waiting, one of the most common pastimes for soldiers was rolling dice. Some historians suggest that part of the disciplinary trouble Roman legions occasionally faced stemmed from gambling debts, creating tension among the ranks. Imagine a soldier posted at the edge of the empire, hundreds of miles from home, with little to do between patrols except gather around a fire with his comrades and gamble away weeks of pay in a single night. But this passion for gambling wasn't limited to ordinary soldiers. We find it at the very top of Roman society as well. Emperor Augustus is known to have been quite fond of gambling. In letters attributed to him, he reportedly wrote about the games he played during the Saturnalia festival, mentioning both his winnings and his losses with a certain lightness. According to some accounts, when he lost, he took it with good humor, sometimes even making up for it by giving small gifts to his friends. There's something almost endearing about the image of the most powerful man in the world, cheerfully losing a modest sum to his dinner guests and laughing it off. But not every emperor was as measured as Augustus. Emperor Claudius became almost legendary for his passion for gambling. According to accounts from the period, he was so enthusiastic about dice games that he reportedly wrote a book on the subject, a work that hasn't survived to us, but is believed to have covered strategies for playing dice. He's even said to have kept a portable gaming board in his carriage, so he could keep playing during his travels. Picture the ruler of the known world, jostling along a Roman road in his carriage, rolling dice to pass the hours between one city and the next. Emperor Nero, meanwhile, is remembered as a far more extreme example when it comes to gambling. Some ancient sources claim he staked enormous sums on a single roll of the dice. These kinds of stories were likely exaggerated somewhat by writers of the period, since much of what survives about Nero was written specifically to paint him in an unflattering light. But regardless of how much exaggeration is involved, the very existence of these stories tells us something important. Gambling among the upper class had become widespread enough, and at times uncontrolled enough, that such tales felt believable to the people repeating them. So what was the real cost of this passion for gambling? In Rome, gambling debts could become a serious social problem. There are recorded cases of wealthy nobles losing part of their land, or even their enslaved workers, in a single night of play. Some writers of the period complained that gambling, particularly among young aristocrats, had become a fast and reliable way to burn through a family's fortune. A young man from a respectable household might inherit land, status, and wealth built up over generations, only to gamble away a significant portion of it within a few reckless years, a pattern that worried more than a few concerned fathers and moralizing writers of the time. Some writers of the era described gambling addiction in terms that feel almost strikingly modern. The urge of someone who has lost to keep betting in order to recover that loss, and the urge of someone who has won to chase that same thrill again. This cycle closely resembles the pattern that addiction specialists describe today, a reminder that human psychology hasn't changed nearly as much as we might assume over the past 2,000 years. Some of the early church fathers, as Christianity rose in prominence, also began directing sharp criticism at gambling. They argued that it encouraged greed, weakened family bonds, and pushed people to place their trust in chance rather than in God. These criticisms were an early version of the religious and moral attitudes toward gambling that would continue to shape European thought for centuries afterward. So what could the state actually do against this widespread gambling culture? In practice, not much. The laws existed on paper, but enforcement was nearly impossible. Gambling continued quietly in homes, in taverns, and even, it seems, in some public bathhouses. Authorities occasionally cracked down, particularly on games played in public spaces, but this tended to push gambling further underground rather than eliminate it. A law that can't realistically be enforced against half the population tends to just become background noise. Everyone knows it exists, and everyone quietly ignores it. Interestingly, some of the dice recovered from taverns turn out to be weighted differently from ordinary dice, meaning they were deliberately manufactured to cheat. This tells us something else. Gambling wasn't just widespread. It had also given rise to a small economy of cheating and exploitation built around it. Loaded dice were criticized by writers of the period, and dishonest gambler characters even became figures of mockery in some comedic plays of the time, the sort of stock character everyone in the audience would immediately recognize and groan at. There's also something worth noting about how gambling intersected with everyday commerce and social life. Taverns that offered gambling tended to do brisk business, and some innkeepers likely made as much from hosting games as from selling wine and food. Public baths, meant to be places of relaxation and hygiene, apparently doubled as informal gambling dens in some cities, judging by the game boards etched into their floors. Gambling wasn't confined to a shadowy underworld. It's also worth pointing out how gambling shows up in Roman literature and satire, not just in legal records. Writers of comedic plays and satirical poetry frequently poked fun at compulsive gamblers, portraying them as pitiable or foolish figures who couldn't help themselves, always convinced the next roll would turn their luck around. This kind of satire only works if the audience recognizes the type immediately, which tells us that the compulsive gambler was already a familiar character in Roman daily life, someone everyone had either known personally or heard stories about. Now let's step back for Rome was a civilization known for its disciplined army, its intricate legal system, and its remarkable feats of engineering. But at the same time, from its very top to its very bottom, it carried a deeply human weakness for chance, risk, and uncertainty. Even emperors, while ruling over a massive empire, spent their idle hours placing their hopes on the fall of a small die. Perhaps this is one of the more unchanging truths of human history. No matter how advanced or organized a society becomes, the urge to flirt with uncertainty, to trust in luck, and to chase the thrill of a single moment never fully disappears. Between a die rolled on the stone-paved streets of ancient Rome and a die rolled anywhere in the world today, the distance is actually far smaller than we tend to assume.